Oh, hello. You caught me admiring my Eberly stock bag. I have a few of them, and the reason I admire it so much and I love using their gear is because it's amazing. One of the other reasons I love Eberly stock is they support military and law enforcement openly. And what I mean by that is there are other companies out there where they will make gear specifically for us, but we're more like a dirty little secret. Where Glenn Eberly, the founder and owner of Eberly stock, is a veteran, a former Olympian, and a proud supporter of not only law enforcement but also military folks. And on top of that, they make the best gear and apparel, the bags and apparel that I've ever used. So head on over to Eberly Stock, put in the Ones Ready code for your 10% discount, and make sure that you're supporting the folks that openly and honestly support us. Appreciate it.
So, hey everybody, welcome back to the Ones Ready podcast. We're happy to have you. We have a pretty interesting guest, which I'm really looking forward to because if you're anything like me, space is fascinating. I mean, I'm out there with my family nearly every night, as long as the weather's good, actually looking up at the stars and finding new stars and checking out satellites and stuff like that. So I'm really looking forward to our guest, who is Mr. Cody Kelly, working for NASA. So appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. Like start.
Oh yeah. So
Just start talking.
Just start talking. Yeah, great intro. Yeah, Cody Kelly. I work at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, which is up in Greenbelt, Maryland. I'm the National Affairs Mission Manager for Search and Rescue. So I grew up in the Hill Country, just north of San Antonio. So we had a lot of air traffic into Kelly Field and Lackland and Randolph, and started that passion for service and wanting to join the military. But unfortunately, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which meant that career dream was pretty much ended at that point. Back in the 90s, I had really fallen in love with the search and rescue and PR community as a kid, which is like the nerdiest thing ever. When Scott O'Grady was shot down over Bosnia, and there was the massive PR effort to bring him home. And I just remember being captivated by that in the late 90s, that we as a nation would commit those kind of resources to go find a downed aviator and bring him home. And I was very lucky within NASA to over time started out as a spacesuit designer, working on our Lunar spacesuit that we were going to use to go back to the moon, Mars. And then I got into crew survival, really working on life rafts, beacons, survival equipment, more like within the kind of the Air Force's AFE, aircrew flight equipment, flight physiology kind of realm. But I started understanding that there was a lot of DoD connections and Air Force connections to the type of work that we were doing to make sure we could keep our astronauts safe and we could bring them home safely, as well as support that larger kind of whole of government PR mission.
It's crazy to me to think about the amount of variables that you guys are having to take into consideration, because if we look at personnel recovery or search and rescue in, we'll just call it the continent of Africa, right? So you have tyranny at distance. It's an enormous place. There's some elements, lack of water in some regions, extreme heat, sometimes, cool or at least temperature swings so that, hypothermia could happen. I mean, like that's a real problem that we deal with, being able to have enough fuel to get aircraft to pick somebody up or to rescue somebody. But I mean, you're dealing with variables that I don't even know or understand. I mean, you're talking about, I couldn't even tell you. Like, I don't know. What are some of the things that you guys are dealing with?
So for us, our office, I started out working on the Orion program, which is our capsule that's going to take crew members to the moon and back and do that kind of deep space exploration. And we actually went down and worked with the PJs and that PJ's pro community to understand how we would do open ocean rescue. Because when you launch a space capsule to the moon or to the space station, they could land anywhere in the world if there was an emergency. So we did a lot of work looking at how do we integrate the Air Force mission. So, working with the C-17s out of Charleston and Hickam and the Alaska Air Guard guys, and then working with the 60 community to, what are the limits to how far out they can go to drop PJs in the water or rescue the rescuer in the event of a maritime rescue. And then the C-130 community working with combat air forces to make sure that they have the right electronics gear to find, fix, and locate astronauts in the water or a capsule, whether it's a SpaceX capsule, Boeing capsule, or Orion capsule, anywhere in the world. And that really ties back to the very historic NASA DoD terrestrial rescue piece, going all the way back to Gemini 8. So Neil Armstrong, back in the 60s, they had an abort while they were on orbit, and they had to land in the South China Sea. And it was PJs that went out and made that jump and that rescue, and was able to find Neil Armstrong and Scott Carpenter or his partner and bring them back home safely. So NASA has this history all the way back to the 60s with DDMS or Department of Defense manned spaceflight support to provide that kind of terrestrial rescue services. And now, our office, we support the U.S. search and rescue program. So that's working with Air Combat Command, the Coast Guard, and NOAA to make sure our satellites can find you anywhere in the world. And that includes support to downed aviators overseas and then civilians here at CONUS. And then in the future, they're talking about the tyranny of distance. We're looking at what would you do for lunar search and rescue? Like no kidding. If you had an astronaut, an isolated personnel event on the moon, right? When someone first told me, I was like, "Wait, is this a joke?"
That's what I'm sitting here.
Is this is this for real? And then you look at how, and again, I'm coming on here. I'm not an official spokesman for NASA, right? This is Cody Kelly, NASA employee. But you look at the ecosystem of users in the moon, right? We're going to have government-sponsored astronauts. So we have the Artemis program that is partnered with SpaceX and other companies to take astronauts to the lunar South Pole. You have, you just have like the rich guy that wants to go land on the moon and do the tourism thing, or you may have international partners that want to go. And we also see that our nation's adversaries, potential adversaries, and that near peer threat, that the moon is one of those areas where there's resources, and just the fact that you're there means that we can't be there. So it's the whole, like the South China Sea and that the territorial parts where we have to make sure that we're establishing good norms and behaviors in the moon. And part of that is search and rescue. We want to make sure that if someone's hurt, if it's 2030 or 2035 and someone gets hurt on the moon, we have this, kind of PR and CSAR system that can help them find, fix, locate, and bring them home. And so legitimately, we're working with SEER guys, we're working with the PJs, we're working up at the Pentagon and other agencies to understand that whole mission and how we can bring our national capabilities to bear on it.
Okay, you said a lot.
So that's a lot, yeah. So, the big thing, you talk about the tyranny of distance, you talk about the issues. Think about if you were in the Horn of Africa, but if you had a tear in your spacesuit, you would die within minutes. Like it's not just a tyranny of distance, it's a tyranny of time, because the time to effect is so much quicker on the moon because we have limited resources and it's so much more dangerous. And for us to be able to go do those missions of real consequence, like lunar geology, going in what are called lava tubes, so caves on the moon, and being able to go down into what are called permanently shaded regions, or PSRs, that's where no light has ever hit. But that's also where we think there may be liquid ice. But that also brings up, hey, you're climbing in a spacesuit down a steep slope in the pitch black.
Jeez.
Like, who would think that could be an issue? You know what I mean? So that's where we get to use our my background is in the fire service, get to use a little bit of a technical rescue background, and then also my engineering brain to try to solve some of these problems.
PJs everywhere are so excited about this right now. They're like, well, we could set up ropes, man. But like,
yeah, no, that's
sorry.
Ropes, pulleys, mechanical advantage. Like, just throw some buzzwords out, and, and you're good to go, right?
They're in. But also, when you actually get your patient, how does like a sixth of the gravity affect how your body works? Like, are Are there medical professionals like working on that problem? Like if you're injured,
Yeah,
how much different is it?
that's a big thing that they've done a lot of studies on what's called incapacitated crew rescue, or ICR, looking at the mechanisms of injury. So, if you had a rover rollover, how would that impact you on the moon? The big thing now, in the early missions is looking at those slips, trips, falls, because if you trip in your house, you just get a bruise, right? But if you trip on the moon and you're wearing a 300-pound spacesuit that's real bulky, real awkward, are you going to break a bone? Are you going to break an arm? Is something going to happen to you during that event? And we saw during the Apollo program, if you go look at the videos, like it wasn't all just hunky dory. A lot of people, they did have some falls while they're out there doing geology. And now we want to do geology, but take it to the next level. And yeah, so there's a lot of work being done on incapacitated crew rescue that's been done over the last 5, 10, 15 years to make sure that they put attachments on the suits, and basically using something like a sked on the moon to drag that person potentially back to a lunar rover or a lunar lander. So all those guys that have sked experience, hey, come on, sign up for the astronaut program.
That's nuts. Yeah, all I'm thinking is as you sell this stuff or you do these briefings, I don't know, I would be like, hey, in case of space pirates and injuries, these are the things that we're working towards.
So that's an interesting comment, because we, as much as we work technically at NASA, I'm an engineer by trade. I went to Texas A&M and did my aerospace engineering degree, but I also did a lot of policy work at the George Bush School of Government. So I did an undergraduate certificate there, and that's where I really got involved with the military establishment and how we, work treaties and stuff between countries for stuff like this. So as technical as these problems are, injured tourist on the moon, injured U.S. persons on the moon, it's a lot of the political part behind it too, right?
Yep.
Because the moon is it's a kind of a sovereign body. Like no one can claim the moon. And we also have what's called the 1967 Rescue and Return Treaty that really guides, like, hey, if someone is hurt or injured while doing spaceflight, it's a national responsibility to help rescue them if you have the capabilities. So talk about pirates and elements like that. We were just in a meeting yesterday where someone brought that up, like, hey, 2050, what's the Coast Guard's role in that? Are we going to be combating, piracy in the moon, as this stuff grows and grows and grows? So we're in this area of time within NASA and within the space community that all these futuristic ideas from those movies from the 80s, space pirates and stuff like that, like, this is like we're actually discussing this as policy, because the barrier to entry for spaceflight is so low now, because you have all these commercial interests like SpaceX, Blue Origin, anyone with the right amount of money can launch stuff into orbit, which can be good or bad.
I mean, we should probably, consult with Ridley Scott or somebody like that.
Yeah, I think so too, right? Yeah, I want that like the machine gun like they have from Alien. Like, who put her in charge, man?
Exactly. But I mean, Sigourney Weaver, you need to take her up.
Yeah, no comment on that. Sigourney Weaver.
No, I was going to ask, since you are dealing with that period of distance and time, and one of the things that we kind of train everybody, at least on the soft side of the house, is your TCCC, your Tactical Casualty Care Medicine. I'm going to mess up the acronym, but to try and help yourself first. So I'm assuming that we're going to be, like, the astronauts are being taught this, or the ones that are going to be on the moon, and then there's going to be all kinds of other stuff that they're trained to. I mean, right. I'm assuming, so I'm kind of asking that, right?
Yeah. So if you look at how they're selecting astronauts, again, I'm not privy to that. I wish I was on the astronaut selection committee. That'd be cool. But if you look at the kind of folks that they're selecting, you have a Delta Force doctor. You had folks like that. You have Johnny Kim, the Navy SEAL medic. You have all these people that have a lot of really good expeditionary medical capability as a base, and then they do an amazing job of doing space medicine at NASA. So that's the big thing, is you want to be able to treat yourself first and treat your buddy. And we don't ever do spacewalks currently, and we're not planning in the early days to do lunar spacewalks on your own. So you would always have kind of your battle buddy going with you to go do these explorations and be able to provide that initial 9 line, right? Of say, hey, these are the injuries, mechanisms of injury, and get that to someone that can help you out. And that's something our office is working with the PR community and the EVA community, or extravehicular activity community, to develop what that NASA 9 line looks like for a lunar medical event. We did a lot of work with the PJs from the 88 test to do the 9 line for the terrestrial rescue part for astronauts, but now we're expanding that potentially to what it would be for lunar rescue as well.
Jeez. So I mean, like, I'm going back to immediate casualty care, and I'm thinking, okay, well, trying to wrap a tourniquet, and maybe a tourniquet, it would not be the right tool for the mechanism of injury on the moon or something like that. But a tourniquet, trying to wrap that around a spacesuit is probably unlikely, or it would have to take a special kind of tourniquet. So I'm wondering, is the answer built-in kind of tourniquet mechanisms, or I don't know. I'm just like, you guys are working with some extremely smart people up there, to include yourself. And I don't know, you definitely don't need some idiot controller that knows zero about medicine or care to come and help you out.
The biggest thing I've learned in my career, and this was something we learned a lot when we were doing the capsule recovery work, was to like talk to people outside of our little bubble, our little echo chamber, right? Some of the best ideas we had for doing patient immobilization on a rocking capsule came from like a junior airman or a really junior level PJ that was like, hey, I saw this in training. Hey, let's try this out. And we actually went out in the Gulf of Mexico and tried it out. So that's one of those things where NASA, we're really smart. I would say I work with some of the best and brightest folks in the world, but we're also always open to talking to people outside of our industry, because we know that may not be the best way to do it. From our perspective, the big thing for the medical care and all of that is to get them to a place of definitive medical care and get them kind of off the X, right? Because the moon wants to kill you just by environment alone. So if you can get them somewhere where you can get them repressurized, somewhere safe, then you can begin triaging those injuries effectively without having to worry about the moon's environment impacting that kind of medical care,
which is extremely unforgiving, whether it's the moon or Mars. I mean, or just on the space station. I was listening to a podcast this morning, actually, and they were, this is kind of funny and also relevant or irrelevant, I don't know, but there's no burping on the space station because there's no need. Like, it's all passing gas, farting basically. Like, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I'm thinking blood flow, right? Does blood flow the exact same way? Right. If we have an open wound, mechanism of injury, whatever it happens to be, like, does blood flow the same way? I mean, does a tourniquet even work at that point? Like, I don't know.
And that for us and for NASA and even for our community, that's where the space station, the International Space Station, and then NASA's efforts to now build more commercial space stations, that's where it's going to pay dividends, because we can go answer those questions really quickly. And you can put together that body of knowledge before we go to the moon, before we go to Mars. And for us, the moon has always been a stepping stone for Mars exploration, right? It's like it's a 3-day trip versus a 6-month trip, but it's still far enough where you can get yourself in trouble, right? Yeah. It's like where you go to college and you're just far enough away from your parents to party on the weekends, but you still can come home if there's some kind of emergency.
Safety blanket.
So our plans right now are to do these initial landings in the mid 2020s, and then actually build a lunar colony or a moon base in like 2030, 2032. So for us in our office, we're looking at how would you use those permanent settlements as rescue coordination centers, like a PRCC for the moon. if you're doing that, if you have that kind of authority and that mission set belongs to like the U.S. Spacecom or someone like that.
Well, I think what's going to happen is you're going to have orbiting special operations surgical teams with PJs that you launch down to the surface. They grab the person, launch back up to the orbiting thing, and back to the colony. I think I just figured it out. So you're welcome, NASA.
You and every other PJ wants to do that, right? Like there's a line out the door of PJs that want to go be astronauts now, to go perform this mission. So get in line behind Brent, get in line behind everybody, all these other guys that want to go. But that's the big thing is, in the future that may be a solution, right? In 2050, but right now we're really leaning into the medical expertise from PJs and all of that command and control experience that the DoD does really well for search and rescue, and working to apply it to the lunar domain, because it's a civilian domain, it's a whole of government domain, and it's an area that's really being addressed in ways that I've never seen in my career before. When someone said, "Hey, we're going to go do lunar search and rescue," that's almost something out of science fiction. But like now, we're actually working in the international community to get radio frequencies assigned, to get get satellite assets kind of figured out. We're working with the Air Force Research Lab and other government folks to figure out, like, hey, how do we do this, from picking up beacons to doing imagery for a PR event? How do we apply what we've been doing for the last 20 years in Afghanistan, Middle East, on that really high tempo PR mission, and use some of those best lessons for the future? And the cool thing about sorry.
No, I was. I think some of the things that people aren't thinking about is just when you talk about the tourism and all the different people out there. Like when we do what we do, if everybody doesn't have the same radios or the same frequencies or the same type of equipment that can read everything, right? Like the logistics, as you're talking, I'm trying to run down like these logistical problems in my brain, and I'm gonna have a headache as soon as we're done here, because it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and so that's what we work every day. Like I would say, in my perspective, I'm an engineer first. And, we do engineering, but it's a lot of configuration management to understand that, hey, if this really happened, when you go out the door, everyone's on the same page, sheet of music, and everyone's moving forward in that regard. And that's why we've worked so hard to standardize and socialize what all of our message traffic looks like, so that whether you are ESA, European Space Agency satellite, and a DoD satellite, or a civilian satellite, you're going to be able to pick up those signals and relay those effectively. So it's been a lot of regulatory process and a lot of socializing, search and rescue, because, one of the big problems we've always had with search and rescue is it's a lot like an insurance policy. Nobody wants to pay up front until they need it.
Yep. And
we're thinking about that 35-year from now threat. So you have to make sure we're getting the good foundational blocks today. And the really cool thing about my job, and again, I think I have the best job at NASA, because, 50% of my time I get to go talk about, moonwalking, not the dance, the actual, actually doing the moonwalk.
I went straight to moonwalking.
Yeah. And then the other 50% of my time, we get to actually support real search and rescue every day. NASA supports the U.S. SARSAT program, which is a constellation of satellites that we use on GPS to find 406 megahertz beacons.
Yeah.
So when someone punches out of an ejection seat in an F-16 in Louisiana, we see that beacon and we're able to report on it. We saw that actually during an exercise. We were working with Det 3 down in Patrick, and we have this really cool web app that sees all the beacons. We're doing training for the SpaceX mission, and then I see a news release say, hey, a pilot's missing in Louisiana, and I'm able to see it on my screen. And that's the kind of thing that's like every day we get to make real impacts for the search and rescue community. That's why I think I have the best job in the world, honestly, and the best job at NASA, because we get to take all of the NASA expertise in satellite communications. But at the end of the day, we always know it's going to be some 19-year-old airman or 19-year-old Coast Guard swimmer that's going out and doing the rescue. And we get to have that connection back to the operational forces to make sure we're making good decisions, so the end operator isn't overburdened trying to go rescue someone.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, you got my brain like spinning a little bit on things, but like one of the
Sorry.
things that you said where the moon is always trying to kill you is funny because I remember when I was down in the jungle with Brent, we did like jungle training. That's what they said about the jungle is it's always trying to kill you. And then I'm thinking about the differences
No,
between
Brent's trying to kill you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Brent was he's a psycho, my favorite psycho. But like we have experience in different things. I'm just thinking you change environments in space. I would think fairly often between sunlight and darkness. You're getting out of the space junk of our atmosphere and all these other things. It's kind of like taking someone from the jungle straight to Alaska, and being able to do all those different things. And actually, I had a question. I'm sorry, I'm rambling now. How do comms work out there? Do solar flares even affect anything without atmosphere?
Oh yeah. Yeah, calm. So calm. That's the biggest, the hardest part of this whole thing is the communications element.
Yeah.
And trying to make sure everyone is playing nicely in that whole communication spectrum. Here on Earth we have the FCC, we have all these protected frequencies, but the moon's kind of like the Wild West right now, where everyone, depending on who you belong to, has different rules to work by. And then also just just having a communication relays in place. Right now there's not a lot of asset. You don't have GPS on the moon right now. You don't have an Iridium sat phone capability on the moon, but NASA is working with commercial industry and our international partners to build and procure that, to be able to do that. Right now we're looking, if you land on certain parts of the moon, you have direct vision back to Earth, just like Apollo did. But we're looking to build communications relays so you could go on the backside of the moon, like they did in the Terminators movie.
So, I mean, are we talking like does VHF, UHF work on the moon, or are we talking like TSMX, mesh networks? Like what?
Yeah. So it's all of the above. So for lunar surface communications, we are looking at UHF to UHF between radio satellite between spacesuits. So you're talking on like a 410 megahertz, something like that. But a big thing for us is S-band communications, being able to talk up and down to satellites and relay that information kind of all over the moon. There's also a lot of companies that are doing mesh networks, and even Nokia is looking to do an LTE, like a 5G LTE, like cell phone service on the moon that's under a funded NASA research program. So like you just take your iPhone up there and just talk on your iPhone. I'm just kidding. That'd be way in the future. But
like, what?
You could do your TikTok and all your stuff up there on the moon. But that's really what our office is under, all of that overarching umbrella, to make sure we have good comms, because that's always what fails in an operation. Yeah. It's like, if I don't know where I'm at and I can't communicate where I'm at, that's where issues arise.
Again, I'm gonna go back to my original opening salvo was there are variables that I don't even know what you have to consider. And yes, comms being self-care being one of the most important ones, but also comms. I just that is such an enormous problem. And then, we almost take it for granted, operationally or in training, where, okay, I can hit SATCOM or I can hit some kind of relay station. You're going, the astronauts are going to an environment where none of that infrastructure is set up. There's nothing. And
it's more dangerous, right? Like,
yeah,
there's no air. Like, you just can't even breathe. So, that's the kind of challenges we're looking from the enterprise level, is to make sure that we have communications back to Earth to relay this information, but we're also looking to make sure in the future that we're Earth independent. So we want to make sure that everything that we're doing on the moon is kind of self-contained, because we know that Mars, that's a 21-minute communication delay. And how we can't be calling home all the time to say, hey, I stubbed my toe, right? We got to make sure that we're self-reliant, and we're building that capability for the future. But it's interesting that communications comes up, because that's the fight we have all the time, to make sure that we're procuring the right communication solutions, we have the right requirements for that, and we're also scoping it in such a way that we don't buy a widget today that becomes obsolete tomorrow. Because you see a lot in communications, right? Everything's all the rage for like one fiscal cycle, and then you're like, it's a brick, right? I can't do anything with it. So that's what we work all the time, and that's what we work a lot within the terrestrial rescue part in the PR community with the Joint Personnel Recovery Agency on some of their technology specifications, requirements for the future, and working with Air Combat Command for that.
How big is the team that's working on this?
For Lunar, they're it's a large interagency effort. For search and rescue, it's like 4 people.
Oh my gosh.
It's like myself, and then we have contract support. We lean a lot on Aerospace Corps, which is a company that does a lot of our systems engineering and integration. And we were able to get some of their like incredibly smart folks that do this kind of stuff for DoD, like NOAA, all these other government folks that do commercial SATCOM, and they did an amazing job working on those definitions. I'm kind of I heard a lot of the cats and try to figure out the requirements. I talked to folks like Brent, the SEER community, PJs, and even folks at AFIT, Air Force Institute of Technology, to understand some of the policy and technical parts. So it's a very small team. The search and rescue office itself only has about 4 government employees and about 12 contractors that support all of the portfolio of work that we do. But it's kind of cool because it's so small. We all know each other really well, and we're able to do stuff really fast with a lot less of the typical government bureaucracy. And for us, like Lunar, it's the Wild West, right? So like start making assumptions, move off the X, and just go make it happen, right? Which has been something I've gotten in trouble for in my career, but it's typically worked out okay.
Well, I mean, can't say I haven't been in trouble before too for making assumptions
Right.
and stuff like that. But I mean, honestly, it really, and I told Brent this, it actually sounds like you guys probably need a combat controller on there, like a retired combat controller.
A good contracting job after you get out.
Yeah, it definitely.
But we, that's talking to the combat control piece. That has been something we, working with some of the ocean recovery work, seeing how the DoD does all that airspace coordination and stuff like that has been extremely interesting coming from a NASA perspective. We've gone out with the Navy and done capsule recoveries. We've gone out with SpaceX and done capsule recoveries, and just those skills that a CCT type person brings is very important as you're deconflicting fixed wing, rotary wing, naval assets, all that stuff comes into play. So that's been a pretty cool part of the job, is to see the tactical communication and coordination of airspace for PR events. We don't get to drop any bombs on people, but
but you need global access on the moon.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's like interplanetary access at that point.
I really want to.
It's
Sorry.
No,
I was just saying. I really want to stay on topic, but like I keep going to weapons. I'm like, in my brain, I'm like, well, if I fire a weapon on the moon, like where does it go, and how do we do this, and how do we fight each other, and then how do we affect each other's comms and all these other things? How hard is it to shoot out someone else's satellite that's orbiting the moon?
Ooh.
Because it doesn't take that much.
Those
are to reach.
Yeah, those are other discussions. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
So NASA, NASA, we're a civilian agency, and we really support the free and meaningful access to the moon. Not all countries do, and we've seen that by some of our near peer space faring nations that want to potentially isolate areas of the moon for their own economic and political means. So for us, I'm staying in my swim lane. Search and rescue and personnel recovery is very important, because we don't want an adversary to be able to use that against us, or to deny us access to our civilian, commercial, and governmental efforts. So we have to make sure that as we go to the moon, we follow those treaties, and we are a good example for all those other countries to follow. And I will say there's a lot of really dedicated people within the defense community that are looking at those efforts for adversarial influence on the moon to make sure that we are keeping apprised of developments overseas of other countries and making sure they're protecting our civilian and potential military interest in cislunar space.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Nah, it makes sense. The other things I keep going back to in my head are all the space trash out there and all the threats with that or problems. And then like the radiation. And when we talk about comms, I'm like, there's no ionosphere. There's no, like you're out there unprotected and alone. And so like how you have the suits, like remember those old Black Hawk uniforms that had the tourniquets and everything that were embedded inside that really didn't work? You guys remember those at all? Like that's how I imagine the spacesuits are. But like, I don't know. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around how difficult it would be to recover someone, stabilize them, and get them back with all those threats involved. And and how do you guys even get out of the atmosphere to the moon with all that stuff floating around in our beyond our upper atmosphere?
Yeah, so the low Earth orbit threat with all the space junk. We actually work a lot with Space Command with their space radar. They after we had those anti-satellite tests, the Russians shot down one of their own satellites and it littered low Earth orbit. We do a lot of work to make sure we don't have any kind of impacts on the space station or the launches, and we'll actually plan our launches around predicted kind of space junk events. And so far, that hasn't been a huge threat to launching from the Earth to space. And we've seen a lot of commercial companies that are getting ready to go start doing space junk removal, which I think is very important to start, to mitigate a lot of these threats. And we're seeing a lot of companies that are like, hey, we can recover old booster bodies or old engines and deorbit them correctly. So the space junk environment is very important, but it currently hasn't been impacted yet. We have to make sure that countries aren't shooting down satellites and putting a bunch of junk up there. That's important. But we also have folks in mission control that talk to Space Command with their space radar, and we can move the space station out of the way of some of that junk and take preparations for that. The radiation environment. I'm not a nuclear engineer. I'm not a radiation expert, but that's always been one of the big problems we've had with real beyond low Earth orbit exploration, because the moon's or the Earth's magnetic field really protects you from radiation when you're close to the Earth. But out at the moon and even onto Mars, that becomes a highly charged radiation environment. So those are the kind of things that as we're building moon bases, we're putting in radiation protection. We're looking at how do you maybe live in those lunar caves, and then use the lunar soil as a kind of a radiation barrier if there's any kind of solar flare and stuff like that.
No, it makes sense.
It's all way above my pay grade. I'm just the rescue guy.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, it's like, but we go to meetings, we work, this is like the kind of stuff like once in a career, right? Like we are like, I've worked at NASA as an intern since 2007, full time since 2012. And now like, this is like legitimate. Like we're getting ready to launch rockets to the moon. Like this is like, you go out to KSC and there is a rocket almost as tall as a Saturn V sitting out there ready to go. Right. You go out there and you look at it and you're like, people built this. Like, no way. Like, it's like something out of a kid's dream, a nerdy kid's dream, but it's still a dream. and I'm like, this is an amazing time for NASA where we're working with our commercial partners. So SpaceX is launching rockets like 3 a week, I think a couple weeks ago. Like we're working with them to get reliable access to space, which is important for us as a nation. And then, you have this moon rocket sitting out there ready to go, and it's about to get real busy in space. And that's why we're trying to make sure that NASA is working really well with the defense community, because the Air Force and kind of that global access part has served us so well in the past. We want to make sure we keep that relationship going into the future as the AOR for the DoD starts expanding beyond low Earth orbit.
Right. I think the last thing I want to ask about is I think the highest at risk I've ever felt is in between places, right? So there's takeoff, which is high risk, and landing, which is high risk, and it's a little different when you're talking about Earth to moon. So like I think once you get established on the moon and you have plans, and once you're still close to the Earth and you can get back down into the terrestrial, you have plans. But there's a huge gap in between. And what are you going to do if something happens on the in between?
Yeah, that's so we actually briefed 3-star General Shaw on this exact thing. This is a very extremely high visibility, and a lot of eyes are on this right now. It's called XGEO, so beyond geostationary Earth orbit. So that period from Earth to the moon, that's Apollo 13, like all the stuff like that. Where if you have an event, how do we go find the spacecraft and then perform a rescue? So we're working with U.S. Spacecom to understand their authorities to go do a space rescue, because technically everything beyond low Earth orbit is U.S. Spacecom AOR, right? And every AOR needs to have a PR plan. So we're working with them to understand some of those authorities, and how does NASA fit into that, and looking at using Earth-based systems to kind of locate the spacecraft on the way to the moon. What's its state, and how do we go do that rescue? So that's being looked at actively right now. In our system, we've really talked through it as like you could use the search and rescue beacon on a spacecraft to track it on the way to the moon, just like you would have if you had a downed aircraft or a beacon on a sinking vessel. You could track that to be able to know where it's at and provide status.
I think, and this is not a plug at all, but I wonder if we would be having the same exact conversation right now in considerations if a company like SpaceX hadn't been successful with their reusable rockets. Because you said that there was a time that they were launching several a week, and it really does. I'll pop it up on YouTube and like, oh look, they're launching again, which is fantastic, and I watch it like every time I see it. But their ability to just launch, recover, reset, launch again
exactly
has really fast forward us into the future. Would we be where we're at right now, or at least the things that you guys are working on, if they hadn't been successful?
I think that it fundamentally changes the discussion, right? The ability for a company at very low cost to go do what they've been doing does fundamentally change at least the low Earth orbit economy. I think it's also helped NASA look at what commercial capabilities are out there, so that we're not spending a lot of our money developing a capability that only we can use. Why would we want to spend billions of dollars to build a one-off spacesuit or a one-off spacecraft that only we can use, when we can use that money instead to spur American industry, so that when I get my $50 million, I can go buy a flight to the moon, and it's kind of self-supporting. So NASA is slowly shifting from being a builder and developer of capability to a user of capability, and it's the same model you saw for the military in the early 20th century, right? They at one point were the builders of aircraft, and now they turned it over to industry. And why would the Air Force need to build its own airplane when you can buy one from Boeing?
Yep.
That's really where we're at that phase right now, and I think it's worked really well. We have to be very cautious. There were a lot of growing pains to get there, and we have to be very patient with that and understand that it's not always going to be perfect. But we, like I said, the 80% solution sometimes is good enough, and we have to make sure we're not doing this whole analysis by paralysis by analysis. So, to get back to your question without rambling, I think the SpaceX's success has been very good for commercial industry. It's also shown other companies they can do it, and as a benefit, NASA reaps those rewards because we get to go use those commercial services.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm an 80% solution kind of guy as well. So, but Cody, I could talk to you all day long about this, but unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time. So, definitely appreciate you joining us. It's been a great conversation, and I'm actually looking forward to when talking to my son about this, because, like I said, Well, we love space, and we love the idea of everything that you guys are working on, and I definitely think it's important. And like I told Brent before, maybe 2 years from now, you'll be getting an application with a resume. Just throwing it out there. But
you bet.
But we definitely appreciate you joining us, and thanks for working on all the stuff that you guys are doing. So for everybody else that's out there listening, appreciate you tuning in. Join in, like, subscribe, hit the little bell so that you know that when there's a new episode. And we'll catch you guys later.